Good morning and welcome to an Ethical Corporation webinar on plastic waste. I'm Ed Long, one of the project directors at Ethical Corporation. Tackling plastic waste and pollution has been the hot topic of 2018, and the emphasis on solving the issue is only going to grow in 2019. It's such a hot topic that we've had over 1,200 sign-ups for today's webinar, which is fantastic, and I see a lot of you are currently signing in live. To help you tackle the plastic problem, today you'll hear from 5 companies tackling the issues head-on. We will be covering circular plastic, closing the loop on plastic waste, reducing your plastic use, future packaging, finding the substitute for plastic, and educating communities on plastic waste and recycling. Today, joining us, we have John Kolarczyk, Senior Director, CSR and Waste Reduction at Walgreens Boots Alliance, Jennifer Ronk, Sustainability and Advocacy Manager at Dow, Michael Colorassi, Vice President of Innovation and Sustainability at Avery Dennison, David Clark, Vice President of Sustainability at Amcorp, and today the session is going to be moderated by Amy Glove, Manager of Technology at Wimpac Portion Packaging. Today's 1-hour webinar will be in the form of a discussion where the speakers will be sharing best practice and lessons learned on the work they're doing to tackle plastic waste. Before we begin, I'd like to emphasize that this is an interactive discussion. On the right-hand side, you will see a box where you can post your questions. Please do post any key questions that you have throughout the webinar, and we'll try and get these answered over the course of the hour. And now I'd like to hand over to Amy, who will lead us through the hour. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you, Ed, and welcome everyone online and our esteemed panel. I thought we would start off with something simple since we're talking about reduce, reuse, and recycle. Of the 4 R's, reduce, recycle, reuse, and replace, what are your companies doing to target this and why? So we'll go through each of you to get an answer. So Jennifer, would you like to start off?
Sure. So I think we can't look at just one of the particular pieces, right? It's important that the products that we make get used wisely, and that's sort of where the reduce piece comes in for what we look at. That might mean lightweighting products so that they use less material than they did but provide the same kind of performance, or looking at material swapping in places where, again, that makes sense, where you can get better performance using less material. For recycling, I think it's really interesting because we are looking at how can we improve collection systems, how can we improve management systems, and then how can you actually take the material that's collected and incorporate it into new plastics. So that includes doing things like investing in a project that's called Materials Recovery for the Future, that's testing advanced sorting technologies at the recycling sorting facilities, along with looking at innovative types of collection systems, like we've teamed up with Hefty for something called their Energy Bag project. And that lets residents in a few cities that have it available to them take their hard-to-recycle plastics and put them in a bag so that they can have an end of life, that they can have another use at their end of life instead of going into a landfill, or instead turning them into fuel that can be reused. So as a company, we're looking at how can we continue to support system improvements when it comes to recycling, along with how can we incorporate those materials better into what we do.
Great, thank you. John with Walgreens, so what are you guys targeting and why?
So I would say very much the same. We're looking at all of the R's and one big C, which is collaboration. So for us, we know that these problems won't be solved on their own. So really working with others to kind of figure out what do we do in all those different R's. So for us at this moment, this isn't anything really new for us. We've been doing some work on this front for quite some time. But now we're kind of using the UK Plastics Pact as a guide for us to kind of say, okay, what are they asking us to do as a member of that pact? So, taking 100% of plastic packaging to be reusable, recyclable, and compostable. Really making sure that we recycle and compost wherever that we can, and make it easy for not only our team members but for our customers to engage in those activities as well. making sure that there's recycled content across our plastic packaging. So obviously for our own brand, that's something that we can tackle internally, but that big C of collaboration is important for our other vendor partners that we work with, and really to just make sure that we do our best to eliminate the problematic or unnecessary single-use packaging items. So we don't want to make plastic the enemy. There's very good reasons that plastic is out there and we need it. It's just really, how do we do better in this space? So like I said, we've been doing this for quite some time. We've been changing, our cotton bud stems from plastic to rolled paper, removing plastic microbeads from rinse-off products, doing all kinds of things for years. But right now, it's really, how do we really collaborate with others to make sure that we're tackling these issues, because we know we're not going to solve them on our own.
Right. Yes, great. David, being a plastic manufacturer, what are you guys targeting and why?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. And I just, for those people who aren't familiar with Amcorp, we are a manufacturer of packaging for consumer packaged goods. So we convert materials into packages that brands use, and then they're sold through retailers like Walgreens and Boots. And what we're doing is on the reduce side, we've been working for years on lightweighting packaging, so people know that the bottles that they buy today, in particular PET, weigh much less than the bottles 5 or 10 years ago, and also down gauging flexible packaging, or even converting from other packages like metal cans or glass bottles into plastic, is actually reducing the materials that are used in packaging in total, reducing carbon footprint, reducing weight, and in many cases reducing environmental impact overall. At the same time, we're improving performance. So we're reducing the impacts of the packaging, not necessarily reducing the number of packages being created, and that's where recycling comes in. John mentioned the goal of all packaging being recyclable by 2025. We're also signed on to that goal to support many of our customers. So designing packaging and selecting materials that are recyclable or will be recyclable is a really important part of our roadmap to solve the problem of plastic waste. And then also using more recycled material is really important, because that creates the demand and supports the market for recycled material. In terms of replace, that mission that I talked about to create all packaging that will be recyclable by 2025 involves replacing a lot of materials that are difficult to recycle or impossible to recycle today, including some barrier materials or others that are added to plastic packaging that make it difficult to recycle, so that we can achieve that goal. And then in terms of reuse, there are some interesting things going on. We do make reusable or refillable PET bottles for some markets, in particular in Latin America. It tends to be where the geography is fairly small, so that it's easy to move bottles back and forth so that they can be washed and refilled. It doesn't work as well in very large geographies like the U.S. market. And also some refill models where we have large bulk refill in a flexible package, which is very efficient, that can be used to refill dispensers and reduce the amount of packaging that's required. So we're touching all 4 of the elements that you mentioned.
Very good. And now, Michael at Avery Dennison, what are your targets and why?
Yeah, so I think very similar to what my colleague said, we were active in all 4 of the R's. I think maybe a slight difference is that we are trying as much as possible to take a market-focused approach to this and understanding the end use of plastics, because as Avery Dennison, we are largely a business-to-business organization. And so we're trying to look further down the supply chain to understand, why is plastics used, where are they used, and how can we potentially impact the reuse, recyclability, or reduction of plastics through engineering means, through material science means, and incorporate that into our products. From a reduced perspective, very much like Amcorp, we're working on down gauging our plastic, our flexible packaging materials, as well as our labeling materials, to reduce the weight of plastics that are used. Around reuse, we are using engineering, a lot of packaging engineering, and specifically to find ways to create packaging materials that either have reusability characteristics or even secondary use characteristics. And we're also looking to incorporate material science into those activities as well. From a recycling perspective, we are incorporating recycled content into all of our product lines and all of our solutions as much as possible. And we've also looked to get out into the community and try to encourage recycling efforts through unique ways. And one of the most unique ways that we've done that recently is with a collaboration with the Plastics Bank and really working on turning plastics into actually a commodity and encouraging local communities to collect plastics before it gets into our waste streams and reuse it and ultimately get it back into supply chain as a material. So we're looking to try to do some more creative things as well around recycling, not only internally, but also externally in the community. And then around replacing, it really is all around innovation for us. And so we are very active in trying to identify new materials, different substrates that we can incorporate into our solution to eliminate plastics from our supply chain. And whether that's going down the route of bio-based solutions, which have some pros and cons, or moving down to paper solutions, we're looking at a variety of different material science options to try to replace plastics where possible as well.
Oh, very good, very good. You've mentioned, a couple of you have mentioned coordination, so I have another question. In a recent article, Key to the New Plastics Economy, it was stated that there needs to be sharing of best practices among plastic-dependent companies and to set a common goal for the expectation that a coordinated marketplace to help foster the innovation of this goal. How are you coordinating with other companies and organizations to foster a more circular system with your plastic products? And can you share who you're working with? So why don't we go right back to you, Michael, and then we'll go around.
Yep. So I think we're active in a number of different consortiums around labeling and packaging materials. For example, is the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, where we're working very closely with not only retail brands, but also other manufacturers of materials that go into apparel, as an example, to work to try to solve this global issue together. And so there are unique initiatives that are being driven through those organizations. I think we also work very closely, and I'll be curious to hear my colleagues on this. What we're seeing is plastics is a big issue for a number of different organizations. Everyone is tackling it slightly differently. And so as a business-to-business player, we're having to create unique platforms around specific customers depending on their specific goals. So that's another area where we're actively collaborating directly with the organizations that purchase our products and helping them to achieve their goals. And then finally, we're very active in what we call the ecosystem, which is getting out into the environment and understanding whether it's large corporations that are focused on recycling or startups that have new technologies. We're looking and we're very actively engaged with smaller organizations who may have some unique technology and unique capabilities that we're trying to either invest in and support or broaden out to improve their scalability. But we're very active around the area of circularity when it comes to taking plastic materials and, for example, taking PET and bringing it back to its basic components from a chemical perspective, and then reconverting it back into other either plastic products or other solutions. And so we're active, I think, in those sort of three areas of large consortium, direct to customer, and then the broader ecosystem.
Okay, and how long have you been involved with working with these other organizations?
I think it's inherent to what we do. We've been part of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, these other these more industry organizations for decades. I think only within the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years has plastics really become a major driver, but we've been engaged for a very long time in trying to drive industry benchmarks or industry level of activity. I think with customers, it's also inherent to what we do, and we try to provide a full solution. So when a brand comes to us and looks for a solution to reduce their plastics, we're working directly with them and trying to engineer it out. And I think in the ecosystem with startups and those sorts of things, that's relatively new, and it's a fast evolving space. And I would say within the last 18 months, we've seen a significant ramp in activity in that area.
Great. David, would you like to address that question? Who are you collaborating with?
Probably the primary collaboration within Amcorp is we're a core partner in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's New Plastics Economy Initiative, and that really recognizes the fact that in the past we've had this linear economy for plastic packaging where we've converted materials, they've been used and done their job moving products through complex supply chains and keeping them safe and convenient for consumers, but ultimately it's become waste. And how do we move that entire model into a circular model really involves not just the design of the packaging and the materials, but also engaging recyclers, engaging governments, and engaging others who are part of the solution. And I think the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the NPEC initiative has done a lot to bring those different groups together, help define exactly what does a recyclable package look like, and then getting the recyclers on board to say, yes, if we design it this way, then we can take it and actually make something out of it, and then work with governments to get the right policies and funding in place to support recycling. And they've done an excellent job with that. Hopefully people on this call know in October, we announced the New Plastics Economy global commitment that was supported not only by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, but by UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program. And now 275 companies, NGOs, and governments have all signed on to this vision that all plastic packaging will be recyclable and actually collected and recycled by 2025. So it's really creating a lot of momentum and initiative. And if you haven't looked at it yet, I encourage you to go online and take a look at that global commitment and consider getting on board as well. And then more at the local level, Jennifer mentioned the MRF project. We also are part of that to try to move flexible packaging into the recycling stream in North America. There's a program called CFlex in Europe, which is looking at creating a market for flexible plastic packaging in Europe, and then also RedCycle in Australia and New Zealand, which is also doing the same thing, collecting and recycling flexible packaging. So working at the global level and sort of the structural issues around circular economy, and then we also recognize that actual collection and recycling happens at the local and national level, so we recognize that we need to work there too.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, David. John, how would you like to add into the collaboration discussion?
Sure. So we work with so many different groups and always looking for more, but I guess the main one I'd like to talk about is Consumer Goods Forum. So those that are unfamiliar with it, it basically, the CGF brings consumer goods retailers and manufacturers together kind of globally. And it's interesting because it's a CEO-led organization that really helps the retailers and manufacturers kind of collaborate alongside other key stakeholders. And in the end, we're hoping it secures consumer trust and drives positive change. Really, with the global reach and with the CEO leadership, they're really able to focus on important issues and collaboration, and they're really in a great position to drive positive change. So back in June, the CGF board met and the issue of plastics actually came up, and the board agreed that the industry really needs to take action on this very topic. And it was really interesting because it kind of set off a whole host of new and interesting working groups. So we're also through the CGF, working with Ellen MacArthur on the Global Declaration on Plastics to make sure that all the CGF members can support it, making sure that it's something that lots of different people can join onto. And they've enabled 3 different plastics task forces, optimizing package design, which is basically the focus of identifying specific issues to be addressed to enable the reduce, reuse, and recycle approach. So there's those R's again. The second one's consumer engagement. What's the opportunity to adopt some of the approaches used by collaborating for different initiatives that are going on to get really consumers engaged? And one of the interesting things around consumer engagement, I think, is that it's important to remember for somebody like Walgreens and Boots, when we talk about consumers, I mean, our people are consumers too. So being able to educate consumers and our team members on the importance of recycling and the different ways that you can recycle the different things that are recyclable will continue to get people educated, and just, starting from the ground up, letting people know that, this is an important issue and this is why, and trying to make it as easy as possible for people to do it, because people stand in front of bins and see 5 or 6 different options and don't know what to do and eventually just give up. So the idea really around that consumer engagement piece is to make it as easy as possible and make sure that people have the opportunity to recycle and really understand what's recyclable. And then the third one is enabling recycling systems. So really, how do you scale pilots? How do you facilitate investment? And how do we work with other groups that are already active in these areas? So some of the other ones that my colleagues have talked about, and I'm sure some that Jennifer will talk about as well.
Great. Have you seen, like I said, you've been doing this for a while. Have you seen progress, as far as like you're educating your employees, you're educating consumers? Do you see the effect of it already, or are we still working on that? Well,
I would say it's yes and yes. It's a work in progress, and we are seeing some positive results. So internally for us, it's definitely a major focus for us for lots of different reasons, and plastics certainly is one of them. But really driving that more circular economy approach, making sure that we're sending less waste to landfill and really recycling everything that is recyclable for lots of reasons. It's a good business decision, obviously. Somebody earlier mentioned that a lot of these things, yes, they are commodities, and we should realize the value of these commodities. So, there's definitely a business case to it other than just the fact that it's the right thing to do. So we are seeing improvement, but we are certainly well aware that there's a long way to go. But all those journeys start with that first step. And I think, we're probably on step maybe 5 of a very long journey, but the juice is definitely worth the squeeze in lots of different ways.
Yeah, that's great. I just, with the 2025 date out there, that's going to come up fast. That's why I asked that question.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Jennifer, you mentioned working with Murph and with Hefty. Any other collaboration?
Oh my gosh, so many others. And I think I want to take a step back a minute so that everybody on the phone understands sort of where we all are in this chain. So Dow doesn't make packages or products, we make plastic pellets that go into those things. So we will sell the plastic material to someone like Dave at Amcorp, who will use it to make a package that he sells to a brand owner that ends up in a store that gets purchased by a consumer who hopefully at the end of the life puts it in their recycling bin, where it has to go to a sorting facility where it then needs to get sorted and then sent off ideally to a market where that material can be reused. Like, that's how many steps are in the process. And so it takes a lot of collaboration at a lot of different levels to make that work better. And for us, that starts, we have a ventures and business group where their whole job is to look for new innovations that might be out there. What are those new companies, new technologies, new ideas that we might be able to incorporate? Then we've got something called our Pack Studios model, where their motto is to innovate, collaborate, and accelerate. And what we do at Pack Studios is we bring in our packaging engineers and our plastics engineers, and we invite in our customers and our end users and even retailers to talk about what kinds of challenges are they facing and how can we all work together to better design things that will meet their needs. But then from there, we work with things like the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, who designed something called the How to Recycle label. And it's fairly new, so not everybody knows about the How to Recycle label yet, but it's very helpful if you can pick up a package and very clearly and easily see, this is something that's widely recycled. This is how you take your package apart if you need to take it apart, or this is what you need to do to clean it if you need to clean it, so that you can recycle it appropriately. And we think that kind of information is really important. We work on things like the WRAP program that the American Chemistry Council and the EPA have put together to help educate people on the availability of the store drop-off programs for a lot of your stretchy plastics like shopping bags or bread bags or dry cleaning bags. We work with the Association of Plastics Recyclers, which, again, so that we can understand what are their concerns when it comes to being able to appropriately recycle plastics. What do they need to do? And then we also look at the bigger picture because we understand the challenges associated with marine debris and waste management infrastructure. And so we're actually part of a developing global alliance to help bring better waste management infrastructure to rapidly developing economies that are having challenges around that issue right now. And that is all along the value chain, where it's manufacturers and brand owners and retailers and waste management companies all trying to work together to solve these challenges.
Very good. I think you've covered quite a bit.
It's a big process.
It is. And just a kind of a follow-up to this question is creating a marketplace. And they've done this, I think, a better job of it in the EU, where they have the extended producer responsibility. But how do we, as an industry, help create that marketplace for the recycled plastic and the reusable to help make this more circular? So I'm talking about how to create the market for the next use of that plastic. And I don't know who wants to chime in first. Maybe you guys can just jump in. Who wants to answer that one?
So I'll start. This is Jennifer, and I'll just say that the commitments that are being made right now by brands and brand owners to incorporate more recycled content into their materials are incredibly helpful to us, right? Us as a manufacturer, that gives us a signal that this is something that's important, this is something that's going to have value, and so we need to spend the time and the resources doing it. So I'm really grateful for the companies that are willing to step up and say that that's important to them and something that they're going to incorporate. It's also important for us as companies to be willing to purchase products that have that recycled content in it as well. So not only selling things that include recycled content, but purchasing things that have recycled content. And that might not necessarily be the soda bottle that's on the shelf. Maybe it's recycled pallets that are in our warehouses. There are lots of options that we can look at for how we can take some responsibility for using that material as well.
Yeah, this is John. I agree with everything Jennifer just said. I would also say that get involved and that's not just individuals, but it's companies. Get out there and talk to other like-minded companies and kind of figure out what they have. One man's trash truly is another man's treasure in this world. Get involved in recycling conferences. The plastic recycling conference is a really good one. Waste Expo. Get out there with other groups. The Recycling Partnership, Association of Plastics Recyclers. I know the Retail Industry Leaders Association is starting a zero waste group where they're talking about these kinds of things. How do we get to a zero waste to landfill model? How do we get a more circular economy going, and really connecting people to say, what types of materials and commodities do we have, and what other manufacturers need those kinds of things, and just really get out there and get involved. And even if you don't feel like you have the solutions, because I know we have some, but we know that there's lots more out there. So really just getting out there and showing the want to get involved and really sit down and start talking through some of these issues. Some of the best solutions come from places that you never really expect to find them.
I would agree with all that. I would also say that we need to work on eliminating the stigma that recycled plastics are either lower performing or more expensive than virgin. And I think as we've gotten more involved in this and worked with brands and retailers around incorporating more recycled content, what we're finding is that one, no, the performance is similar or identical to virgin. And from a cost perspective, we've actually found very unique ways of not having to incur additional costs. So I think there's also the economics and the performance side of it that we need to make certain that we continue to talk about and address. Because I do believe there's a stigma out there that there still is a difference.
And this is Dave. I'm intrigued by what Michael said. Maybe we can go into a little bit more detail, but I guess I'd start out by reminding people there are many different types of plastics, and the recyclability of PET versus polyethylene versus polypropylene are very different. So we have to be careful when we talk about which types of plastic and the economics and marketplaces and uses for each one. Today, certainly for recycled plastics that we can use in food grade packaging, which are safe to for food contact, they do cost more than the virgin resins that they're replacing. And there are, regulatory reasons and technologies that may be available that can reduce that cost over time. I think that's an area where, we can do a lot more work and try to expand the use of recycling or recycled materials in the packaging that we make. The other thing that I'd point out is that it costs a lot of money to collect and sort and process materials. And certainly today, the economics of that in almost any part of the world mean that those costs are going to be more expensive than the competing virgin material. Amy, you mentioned EPR in Europe. One of the reasons that they can come up with competitive materials is the collection is subsidized through the extended producer responsibility fees. And that subsidy helps make the materials competitive, whereas in other parts of the world where you don't have that sort of marketplace adjustment or subsidy, it can be very different. In some places, you have, the economics where you have in the developing world, people with very low incomes are able to selectively collect materials that have value and supplement their incomes with it. In places like the United States, you have, only 60% of people having access to collection because many local governments decide that they don't want to spend the money on recycling and offering it to their citizens. So, in addition to recycling, one of the things we can do is demand that our local governments give us decent recycling programs that allow us to put the right things in the bin so that they can have another use.
Very good points, David. Very good. I'm getting a lot of questions online. I'm beginning to wonder if I should skip to some of these since the people who called in have specific questions they want answered. We've touched on a few. So I'm going to just jump to one. It's kind of related to one I was going to ask anyway, is how are your companies engaged with cities and municipalities to coordinate what you're doing, but also get more in sync across governments to halt the flow of plastics into waterways? And how do you help cities recognize and act on the damage of the ocean to the ocean when most cities do not use that ocean's lens? But so I was going to ask a question about education of governmental agencies. So we'll just go ahead and jump into that one. Who would like to take that? Jennifer?
Sure. So it comes through a lot of the other partnerships that we have. So like in North America, we'll work with Keep America Beautiful or the Recycling Partnership to reach out to both improve recycling in communities and to improve, litter collection and awareness programs also. But the problems in the developed world are a little bit different than in the rapidly developing economies where the waste management infrastructure hasn't quite kept up yet. So for those situations, we're working with the Global Alliance, or there's another organization called the Asia Plastics Coalition. There are organizations like Circulate Capital that is working on specifically investing in primarily Southeast Asia in communities that need more waste management infrastructure. So helping them get the collection systems in place, the sorting systems in place, so that the material can be, recycled when appropriate, landfilled if that's what's necessary, but absolutely stop it from getting into the environment. And it's going to take a lot of collaboration all across the value chain with communities all around the world to help stem this tide. But I think that there's the desire and the will to do that right now. We've got a couple of demonstration programs going, and the point of them is specifically to see how we can demonstrate the value to doing that in a way that can be replicable.
Right. Anyone else have anything they want to add?
Yeah, this is John, and we've been engaged in a program with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation called Beyond 34. And basically, the project is trying to take the recycling rate, which has been stuck at 34 for quite some time, and try to improve it. So it's a real circular economy-based program, so plastics is certainly a piece of it. And we've been very engaged with other companies. Walmart's part of it, Target's part of it, Coca-Cola's part of it. And really what we're trying to do is just try to get that recycling rate and work with local business and local government and improve it. And we're trying to do it in a way that's scalable. So if we're able to do it in one particular location, we could kind of hand it over to another location and say, this is kind of what we did. And if we can get them most of the way there with some local tweaks and changes, that's kind of the plan behind it. So we've been very active in Orlando, which has been a very, very up and coming city in sustainability world. And they've been extremely helpful. The local businesses have been very helpful as well. And the idea would be to continue to drive change in Orlando while looking for our next city for us to kind of bring on and hand that blueprint over and kind of see how we can continue to focus in on that. So I think that Orlando has been a really, really willing participant in this, and I think that's super important. But we're also going to have to take a look and say, what about the areas that maybe aren't quite so willing and aren't quite as ready as Orlando in that area are? And I know Florida's been, pushing hard to improve their recycling rates. So we chose that city on purpose to kind of find a willing partner to help find some of these solutions. And then really it's going to be, how do you also look at places where they're maybe not quite so willing and ready and be able to replicate some of these processes. So I would say that we're starting in particular areas and trying to use those lessons learned and continue to push it across to our other areas. Certainly in the UK, as being an international business like we are now, you've got other areas that are much further down the road on these types of things. So taking the best practices that they have in place and figuring out how did they get to where they are and building those internally and then sharing those externally as well, super important for us.
Great. And I'll kind of build off of that again. The UK Plastics Pact Roadmap listed as step 1 to eliminate problematic or unnecessary single-use packaging. And I had a specific question come in, John, of whether Walgreens is going to eliminate plastic bags. But I'm going to open this up to everybody. If there were certain types of single-use items that you are targeting at eliminating, and what are you doing about that? So we'll go back to you, John, first.
So again, we're looking at everything, and certainly plastic bags are one of them, and it's the one that's getting a lot of focus these days. I'm sure everybody saw the National Geographic and saw the pictures of the birds with the bags around them and things like that. And certainly horrible pictures and horrible situations. So we've eliminated plastic bags in some areas just because we've had to, but really trying to examine everything and find out what those alternatives are and finding better ways to deal with all types of plastic bags included. So again, it's that collaboration piece, working with our vendor partners that we work with all the time in our internal global brands team and trying to figure out what do we do in this space all across the board. So certainly bags are a part of it and an important part of it and a very visible part of it just because it's so tangible and you can see it. And again, it's really working with everybody because I'm sure to the bird, it doesn't matter to them whether it's a Walgreens bag or a Walmart or Target bag. It's still a bag and it's still around them. We've got to figure out how to tackle these things. So I would say everything's on the board. And yes, we are examining ways that we can do better in this space internally as well as with our other vendor partners.
All right, Michael or David, do you have any thing you're working on as far as eliminating single-use items?
Well, this is David. We're certainly reviewing our product portfolio to try to determine which items might be, the best to target for either, some type of reuse or elimination if they may be replaced with something else. But what we've discovered is most of the packaging that we make is very different from a plastic straw or plastic cutlery or a shopping bag, which you might use for a short period of time. And what we're making are fairly well designed and highly engineered products that get a package, as I said before, through distribution to sit on a retail store, make sure that they're safe for people, whether it's food or pharmaceuticals or personal care products. And to eliminate that package could actually create more waste in the supply chain through food waste or other things. So we're trying to be really careful at what we might, what changes we make to make sure that there aren't any unintended consequences from that. And also at the same time, help people understand there is real value in the packaging. Some people may only experience its use for a few minutes, but it's been doing its job for, weeks or months before that. And it's an important role. So helping people understand, number one, the value of the package and the role of the package in getting people the products that they want and need and enjoy. And then, as I said before, designing it all to be recyclable so that it can be recycled and have another use afterwards. It stays in the economy and out of the environment. So we're much more focused on that part of it than, eliminating the products that are not, that are littering the environment today, the straws and bags and plastic cutlery, which are not the products that we're making at Amcorp.
Right. Any other input?
We're taking a very similar approach.
Okay. Kind of tagging on to some things that you mentioned. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry there. I was about to say we're taking a very similar approach to Amcorp. We're looking at where can we utilize our solutions, because very similarly we have highly engineered solutions often. We are trying to introduce alternatives that perform at the same level, that don't contain as much or any plastic. So we are always looking to innovate into that space. And it certainly is the primary focus for us as an organization. We are looking in several of our divisions internally are looking at how do we eliminate single-use plastics in our manufacturing operations. Maybe less to what we put out into the offer to our customers, but certainly internally we're looking at opportunities to eliminate single-use plastic, whether it comes in the form of straws and plastic forks that may come in through our cafeterias in our factories, or flexible packaging and that raw material are supplied in. We definitely are active internally around trying to reduce the amount of plastics that we're using in the production of our solutions.
Great. Okay. Kind of building off of that as well, people are discussing substituting plastics with alternate materials, but these materials have greater negative environmental impacts, such as greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, food waste, and higher cost. Is your company looking at alternatives to plastics, and how are you addressing these other environmental issues? Who wants to take that question first?
So I think I've mentioned it several times. We certainly are looking at alternatives. When we look at those alternatives, we are considering an end-to-end environmental footprint of those materials, and we make a very conscious choice at that point of whether it's a positive impact or a negative impact. And if it's negative, we generally make a choice to say, okay, we're not going to go down that path. When it comes to paper, for example, and we use a significant amount of paper and paper packaging, we have targets and goals around ensuring that the paper that we do use is from sustainably harvested forests. So we are looking to ensure that where we do use alternative materials like paper, we're doing it in the most sustainable way possible with current technology.
Well, and I'll say from Dow's perspective, we think it's really important to look at the overall life cycle and make sure that any material swapping really does have net benefits. And we also need to be aware, though, of the challenges that we face with plastic products, right? Frequently, they do have the best sustainability profile. The problem is that they aren't reused well, they're not recycled well, they're not really part of a circular economy yet, and they have challenges when they get in the environment. So those are the things that we are focusing on solving, is how do we improve the collection and management after those products have been used, and how can we make sure that we are doing everything that we can to make sure that our materials don't ever get into the environment in the first place. So, I think when there's a preferable material from a life cycle standpoint, that swapping absolutely makes sense. But if you don't have a material that makes sense from a life cycle standpoint, then we need to figure out how we can best use the plastics to get all of those benefits and really enjoy them.
Yep. John or Michael, you want to, or David, anything else?
Sure,
to add
this
to
is
that?
John. So I would say very much the same, with the addition that really it's a change in thinking, right? So it's really, how do we start thinking at the beginning with the end in mind? So, alternatives are alternatives, and sometimes what we think is a great alternative ends up being a worse alternative. So it really is thinking of that whole life cycle, like Jennifer just stated, and really getting people to think with the end in mind at the very beginning, because once the end is here and we have something and it's in our hands and we have to figure out what to do with it, it's a little late to start figuring out that maybe this wasn't the best option. So it really is changing that culture and that thinking on the front end, rather than thinking about it when the end is here and we have to figure out what to do with it. So I would say it's very much a culture change and a different way of looking at things, and making sure that we understand that eventually we have to deal with the packaging or whatever the material might be, and we should start thinking about that way earlier in the value chain, rather than when we actually have it and have a problem on our hands.
Okay. Going back to our questions that are coming in, this is kind of related. It's what would be best, less waste but not recyclable, or more waste and higher recyclability? And then there's a follow-up about how do we avoid downcycling or reduce downcycling. So I think that kind of flows into the thinking ahead and life cycle assessment. But are there cases, how do you make those judgments? Is it better to have something that is, creates less waste, but it's not very recyclable, such as flexible packaging, or we create more waste, but it's got, it's a heavier part, but it's more recyclable? How do you make that decision at your company?
Well, and I think that's where life cycle analysis becomes so important, to really, look at all of the inputs and all of the outputs, because you can't say for any particular product which is the better choice. Our intuition might say one thing, but that's the reason that we have data and science to help back it up. So I think it just really needs to be specific and well thought out. And for things that are challenges, are there design solutions that can help? But I don't think that we want to use 50 times as much material to make something recyclable, because it used to be really tiny and light and useful at doing what it was, but now we're going to make it giant so it goes through the recycling system better. But there are other things where we can make tweaks to the structures. So, maybe that rigid bottle was recyclable and the flexible pouch isn't recyclable, but maybe we can change the pouch so that now it is able to be recycled. So I think we have to be creative in our thinking as well.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and maybe add to Jennifer's comment and say one of the things that life cycle assessments don't do well is help us with trade-offs when there are two different variables to balance. And if we need to trade off a higher carbon footprint versus something that creates more physical weight but doesn't create a carbon footprint, then we really have to think hard about which of those is more important, because there are trade-offs in almost every design decision. And, we can do that based on the current system and what's accepted in recycling systems and what's not, and make one decision, or try to target, a future state where we can make something that's lighter and more efficient and it gets recycled, which ultimately, maybe break even in carbon footprint, because now you're talking about reverse logistics and processing, but eliminates that waste from, landfills and ideally litter. And those are the hard decisions that need to be made based on data and, based on what's right for both the current situation and the future state that you're trying to reach. Unfortunately, there isn't an easy answer that says it's always this or it's always that, that, would make all of our lives a lot easier in some ways.
Yeah, if you figure that out, David, let me know.
We're working on it.
Yeah, it's the $1 billion question.
And adding on to that, we talked about education of governments, but consumers, I find that, consumers, they don't understand the complexity of what packaging really is or what it does, or what effects it has, or that, there's a life cycle trade-off here. Are you doing anything to help educate, the consumers as to, some of these things that, hey, if you use this is, people don't want plastics, but they don't realize that it has a lower carbon footprint. Can you address that? So who wants to?
Well, this is Dave. I'll jump in on this one, because we're on this panel. All of us, we get paid to think about this stuff all the time, and I don't think it's necessarily consumers' job to have to think about it. It's our job to make it easier for them. And if we can design all the packaging to be recyclable, help them feel good about using it, and then recycling it when they're finished, I think that's what we need to be focused on, rather than trying to educate people about all of these different options and why we chose them and how to maneuver a really complex recycling infrastructure. So there's certainly a role for educating people to some extent about the right things to do, and certainly a role for educating government. But part of it, my feeling is it's our job to make it easier and not have to educate everyone.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Anyone else?
Yeah, so this is John, and this is exactly the piece that we are tackling on the Plastics Task Force and the CGF I mentioned earlier, really around consumer engagement. So how do we really get people engaged in the process and in the end make it easier for them? So if they walk into a Walgreens and there's 4 different bins, and they walk into a Target and there's 6 different bins, or they go to the Walmart and there's 2, and they all look different, and there's nothing really ties them back to each other, it's going to make people more confused, not less confused, and are not going to know what to do. So I think the point of making it easy is a really, really important one. I know some people take this stuff seriously, so they will sit there and they will take the time to figure out which bin something goes into, and others will just give up and kind of throw it in there. So I think there's lots of pieces to this question, but really a lot of it really is, how do you make it as easy as possible and explain why it's important and really get people engaged in the process all the way along. So it's not so much just telling people that you have to do it and this is why. It's really more of these are the benefits. This is how we are working to try to make this easier, and in the end, it's going to make the world a better place for these reasons. So it's a lot kind of baked into this question, and but in the end, it's really ease, right? It's just like the plastic bag question earlier. A plastic bag makes it easy for somebody to put something in and take it home with them, but we know in the end, it's not the right option. So is there something else out there, and what can we do to make it better and easier on people? And that's exactly the same thing in this question, in my opinion, is really how do you drive people to want to do the right thing and make it as easy as possible for them to do it.
Anyone else on consumer education and collection?
No, I agree with everybody else. Like, the decisions that we make need to be underpinned by data and science, and we need to be able to communicate those to other people who are as down in the weeds as we are and are interested. But the average consumer needs to understand, how do they recycle the things that they have? How can they, participate in helping keeping litter out of the environment and helping make plastics more collected and used, and what's the right thing that goes in the right bin. So we need things like the how to recycle label to communicate that easily and clearly, so that the average consumer doesn't have to think about it real hard.
Thank you.
The average consumer is changing, right? So, you've got the younger generation coming up now that, this is their world. So when I started working on these things for Walgreens, and I told my daughter I was moving into this area to help people recycle, she said, why do they need help? Everybody recycles, right? So her generation thinks everybody recycles. And I'm like, well, not everybody does, and we need to teach people the right way. So by you doing it, that will show the younger generations after you how to do it. But there's a whole group of people that didn't grow up this way, and this is a big change for them, and change isn't always everybody's friend. So really, a lot of it is understanding who the consumer is and what's the best way to get out there, and really leading by example is the main thing. So, if we're doing it as a company, our people that work for us see that we're doing it as a company. They want to work there. They want to continue to be part of it. They learn how to do it the right way. They take that home. Their kids see them doing it. Their kids teach people, and it continues to just get easier for others all the way across the board. So really, a lot of it is just, deciding as a person and really as a company that this is the right thing to do, and just kind of doing it and getting people kind of on board as you go.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that everyone said. I think that the ease discussion, though, for me is absolutely the most important. And even myself as a practitioner in this space, I was in our office yesterday, and we have 4 different recycling bins and a compost bin, and I had a bowl in my hand. And I sat there and I said, oh man, okay, now which one does this go in? And I think we all do that every single day. And it does make it that much more complex for people to actually make the right choice. And the more that we can reduce the number of variables in that equation, the more likely people are going to be able to actually recycle material in an appropriate way. I think the biggest challenge is then downstream of that is the collection and the supply chain element around recycling. And I don't know that we as an industry have yet solved that. I think it's a lot more complex than people necessarily realize when you just start looking at bins. And I think there's a lot of energy and effort from my organization and from a number of organizations trying to figure out that downstream supply chain of how do you take all these disparate elements that are coming in through different waste streams and actually ensure that it's being recycled properly. It's a big problem. I don't know if there's a solution out there quite yet, but I will say that there's a lot of very intelligent people working on it,
including all of us, right? I think we're about out of time. If I pose a new question, we're going to go over. Ed, should we wrap up?
Yep, if you could wrap up, that would be fantastic.
Okay. Well,
one last question, if you like. We've got a bit of time.
One last question. Okay. I have another one from online. With the China ban and importing waste impacting our global waste management, how is this, affecting our local infrastructures? How is your company dealing with this challenge? So I don't know. Michael, do you want to start?
Not particularly, but I'll give it a shot.
David?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I guess I can use the example of California and the PET market out there. Certainly a number of cities have been hit by the ban on exporting recyclable materials, because we've had this practice for years now where we've collected material, sort of sorted it with a high level of contamination, and we've been able to send it offshore to have people, somewhere else convert it into new products at a lower cost than we've been able to do it here. And then finally, the Chinese government said, let's stop accepting all of this rubbish from around the world, because it is a lot of contamination that they're just offshoring. But what we've seen in California is 10 years ago, the state really started investing in recycling infrastructure in the state for PET bottles because of the CRV program out there. And they've been able to weather this storm really well compared to a lot of other places where markets have been hit or recycling centers now don't have an outlet for material, or even within California, some commodities like paper aren't doing as well. I think it's a temporary issue. We're already seeing capacity coming in online in North America and Europe to use up some of the material. And it's a really good lesson, both in terms of making sure we have resilient markets for the materials and that we treat them like the valuable commodities that they are, and not just try to ship them somewhere else to make them go away.
Yeah, I agree. One of my favorite quotes is that a crisis is a terrible opportunity to waste. And, I think the industry is struggling a bit right now, but I think it's also letting us grow some domestic capacity to better use and reuse these materials. And I think it's going to take some creative thinking on all of our parts on how we can do that better. I talked about the Hefty Energy Bag program earlier, and the city of Boise, Idaho, was having to throw out all of their plastic materials that weren't number 1 or number 2 bottles. And the residents were really unhappy. They wanted to continue to recycle or do something useful that wasn't landfilling all of this material. So now they're able to put them into the Hefty Energy Bag where it's being turned into fuel. And perhaps that's not as good of a use as being able to turn it into another plastic, but I think it's a step in the right direction. And I think the learning that we're getting doing that can help us figure out how to innovate even more and take it even further so that someday those plastics can easily and domestically become new plastic material.
Right. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap up here. I see people dropping off. But I think we've shown that this is a very, complicated and complex issue, but a lot of people are working on it and we're motivated and we're tackling it as best we can. So I'm hoping that the people who called in and listened learned a lot. I certainly did. I want to thank everybody. Thank Ed for giving me the opportunity to work with the group. And I guess you can end it, right, Ed?
Oh, well, thanks, Amy. So, yeah, thank you, everyone who signed in today, and thank you especially to John, Jennifer, Michael, David, and especially to you as well, Amy, for moderating today. Yep, we have run out of time. You will receive the recordings of today's webinar within the next week or so. And if your questions weren't answered, you can raise it with the speakers and 500 more at the Responsible Business Summit New York 2019. Which is taking place on March 18th and 19th. And one of the topics there we will be discussing plastics and innovation as well in some large depth. So if you'd like to learn more, please go to events.ethicalcorp.com/RBSNY for the full speaker lineup and the agenda as well. Once again, thanks for listening and see you all next time. Thank you very much.